Trump's 10 biggest falsehoods of 2018. President Donald Trump misled the American public repeatedly in 2018. He and complained of, while repeating some of the same false claims dozens and dozens of times, on the campaign trail, at the White House, and on Twitter. This year alone, we've fact-checked claims on automotive safety tests, border, among many others. He's said, inexplicably, that people need a photo ID to buy groceries and cereal. But certain falsehoods stood out amid the rest, sweeping claims that defined political conversations and, despite the work of fact-checkers, kept coming up. These are the president's top 10 whoppers of 2018. So true, he said as laughter broke out among the foreign dignitaries in attendance, documented in videos and didn't expect that reaction, but that's okay. Trump later said he intended that UN moment to garner a laugh, but there are varying measures of success, but it's not so true that his administration has been more successful than any other administration in history. When it comes to legislation, Trump has signed plenty of bills in his first 2 years as president, but President Barack Obama, in his first 2 years in office, signed significantly more. And not all legislation is created equal. Trump struggled to sign the kind of major legislation he promised on the campaign trail. He's tried and failed several times to repeal the Affordable Care Act. His signature legislative achievement, tax reform, has fallen short of, and he's offered vague promises of second tax cut to compensate. His first real bipartisan achievement, a criminal justice reform bill called the First Step Act, was signed into law in late December, after he made this hyperbolic claim. Much of Trump's agenda included deregulation and withdrawing the U.S. from international deals like the Iran deal and the Paris Climate Agreement, which he has successfully done. He's also negotiated a new trade deal with Mexico and Canada intended to replace NAFTA, but in order to get it implemented, he'll need support from a divided Congress. This is not true. Auto investment is down. BMW had said they might open a new plant, but they didn't announce one. There are a handful of bright spots for steelmakers. Production is up, for one, but there's no sign of a broad trend of investment in new plants. The falsehood came days after news broke that General Motors would close American plants because the president's steel tariffs raised the cost of doing business, and Trump has repeatedly sought to portray his trade war as a boon to the country. Trump is misstating how tariffs work. Tariffs are a fee charged by the U.S. when a good is brought into the U.S. They're designed to make foreign-made goods more expensive, thus boosting domestic producers, but this claim is false. The GOP tax bill, passed in December, does not amount to the biggest in U.S. history, according to the Nonpartisan Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget and others. It's hard to mathematically measure how reform-wise your tax plan is, Kyle Pomerlew, an economist at independent think tank the Tax Foundation, at the time. Still, he said, Ronald Reagan's 1986 reform simplified the tax code in a big way and was probably more reformish. The president has tried to tie Democrats who support single-payer healthcare options like Medicare for all to the economically struggling nation with an oppressive far-left government. But socialized medicine isn't a radical idea by any stretch, it's the norm internationally, and Democrats are not citing Venezuela as a model. Rather, they've advocated for expanding the United States' own form of socialized medicine, Medicare. This is false. The economy wasn't hurting when Trump took office, and it hasn't turned around in just 2 short years. The economic turnaround Trump refers to is actually credited to his predecessor, President Barack Obama, who steered the country from a devastating recession into booming growth. That Trump might have given the economy a boost with the tax cuts and dampened it with the trade war, but he didn't turn things around. Economies do not turn on a hair with a new presidency. While Obama can look back on his 8 years and see his leadership play out, Trump's effect is still not yet known. This is false. There was no widespread Obama-era policy of separating parents and children. The Obama administration instead opted to detain families together, earning outrage of their own. Advocates said there were a handful of scenarios under the Obama administration where children were separated from their parents because of fears of human trafficking, but reunification was speedy. The president made this claim as a way to defend his own administration's policy from their parents earlier this year, a policy after widespread public outrage and condemnation from lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. Trump called special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia probe a witch hunt more than 100 times. But it's a federal investigation and 33 people being charged with crimes, and seen 3 senior Trump associates convicted. The president's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, of tax and bank fraud unrelated to his work for candidate Trump. His longtime former personal attorney and fixer, Michael Cohen, will go to jail for 3 years for a slew of crimes including lying to Congress about plans to build a Trump Tower in Russia. Trump's former national security advisor, Michael Flynn, was recently excoriated by a federal judge in open court for having worked as an unregistered foreign agent to Turkey while advising Trump's campaign, and is awaiting sentencing after pleading guilty to lying to the FBI about his contacts with Russian officials. All three have cooperated with the special counsel's office to varying degrees, though after his conviction by lying, prosecutors said. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, who until recently oversaw Mueller's probe, has said the investigation is appropriate and independent, not a witch hunt. The facts don't back Trump up here. The Trump administration backed Republican-led states in a lawsuit that claims Obamacare's protections for pre-existing conditions are illegal, and a federal court ruled the law unconstitutional in December. If the Supreme Court confirms the ruling, insurers would be able to start denying coverage to those people. The White House has not proposed alternative legislation that would offer those with pre-existing conditions the protections Obamacare gives consumers. Republicans have spent years trying to repeal Obamacare, and the GOP healthcare bills proposed, and voted on, over the course of the past year would have softened such protections, in some cases allowing insurers to deny coverage to people with pre-existing conditions. Supporting the concept of healthcare for people with pre-existing conditions, and supporting legislation that accomplishes it, are two different things. 2 years after campaigning on a promise to build a big, beautiful cement wall, not a fence, along the nation's southern border that Mexico would pay for, Trump declared victory, telling Americans that quite a bit of his border wall has been built, the government is building more, and that Mexico is paying for it, albeit indirectly. There's just one problem: none of that is true. The government is currently repairing and replacing old sections of border fencing, but barrier has not yet begun and won't this year. The 650 miles of fencing along the U.S.-Mexico border was there long before Trump barnstormed the country during the 2016 campaign, deriding it as subpar. And as for Trump's claim that the new trade deal between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada will amount to Mexico paying for his wall, and have all reported it baseless. Even if the math added up, that trade deal won't go into effect until it is approved by Congress. Lastly, Trump vowed that the wall would be cement and once criticized a reporter who called it a fence. Now, 2 years into his administration, and attempting to rebrand his promised wall as. Jane C. Tim is a political reporter and fact-checker for NBC News.